Hi friends, welcome to our See the Light, Yes You Can Draw Club. I'm Pat Nepley, I'm your master artist. I hope you brought a friend along to join us. This is club meeting number 35 called It Figures, and that's because we're starting on figure drawing. Now whenever we draw people, that makes artists a little nervous, right? Doing portraits, which is what we worked on the last 2 times we met, or full figures, because, well, they're just hard. People are individuals, and in order to make it really look real, it takes a lot of time. But if you learn some basic tips, which we're going to be doing today, you will be a better artist. Now let's review what you're going to need for today's fundamental lesson. You'll need 2 pieces of paper, a pencil, a good eraser, a Sharpie marker, and a ruler. All right, so we've talked about portraits and what the proportions are of the face. And God really did design us with some amazing mathematics in mind. Our symmetry and how there's proportions between all the facial features. Well, the human body is the same way. It's a symmetrical thing. We talked about that before. In fact, look at my friend, the little mannequin. There's 2 arms, 2 legs, and both sides are exactly the same if you were to draw a midline down the center of the body. But there's a lot of important parts, and it's important to understand how all those parts relate in order to do great figure drawing. You probably remember when you were little, you would make stick figures, right? Like this. Probably just a head. Most of you, when you were a toddler, probably drew a stick figure like that. Well, it's not necessarily bad. It's missing some parts, but understanding stick figures and how that helps you draw figure drawing is important. So we're actually going to be doing some stick figures today, but we're going to learn the proper structure of a stick figure so that you can do a great figure drawing. Now, when I say stick figure, I'm simply talking about the most basic structure. Think of the skeleton. So that's what holds up the body and connects all the parts together. So that's why we're going to work on this today. I'm going to have my mannequin handy because I'm going to refer to him as I talk about how we're going to do our most basic stick figure. So take a piece of paper and work along with me. We're going to start with a simple oval, and that's going to be the head. And here's his head here. And the first stick we're going to do is like the spine. Now, a spine is not a solid lead pipe. It's actually like a flexible hose. In fact, you can see how I can bend and twist and turn. You try that now. Bend over and feel your spine. It actually has a lot of flexibility. So that's important to know when you're doing figures as well. They're not stiff. The body can bend and move. So the line that we're drawing represents the torso from the head down. That's the spine. Across, we need to draw a shoulder line. The arms do not come right out of the spine. These are not arms. This is a shoulder line. It's wider than the head, and it'll be even wider if this is a male compared to a female. Now at the bottom of this torso basic line, we're going to do a smaller horizontal line, and that's the hip line. And that represents where the legs connect to the torso. So it looks parallel to our shoulder line, but because we know the spine can move and bend, it's not always going to be parallel to the shoulder line. It's smaller or narrower than the shoulder line, but a little bit wider than the head. Now the arm, it's not a single line. Well, you know that. Just place out your arm, and you can see how it can bend at the elbow, and that your hand can bend at the wrist. So the arm is actually 3 parts. So when you go to draw your line from the end of the shoulder line, there's the upper arm, then there's the lower arm, and then there's the hand. This is the most basic structure. Let's do it on the other side because we're symmetrical. Upper arm, lower arm, and hand. So you can see already that the stick figure is a lot different from the one we used to draw when we were young. Now from the hip line, the leg, same as the arm, is made up of multiple parts. There's the upper leg, the lower leg, and the foot. It's longer than an arm, however. So there's the upper leg, then the lower leg, and then the foot. And a foot, a human foot, is about the size of the human head. upper leg, lower leg, and a foot. Already I can see this basic structure of a figure can do a lot more things than if I tried to draw using this as my basic structure, right? All right, let's see it in a little bit more focus towards what we have as a real figure. This is a really famous painting. It's called The Blue Boy, and it's by an English artist named Thomas Gainsborough. And this is just a young man. He came from a very wealthy family, and this was a portrait they had painted of him. But what if I wanted to do the stick figure that represented the pose, very simple pose, of the blue boy? So I took a piece of tracing paper, and here is the oval for his head. Here's the core spine, a slightly curved shoulder line because he's turned, upper arm, lower arm. His hand is kind of on his hip, so that's his hand. There's the hip line. This leg is forward, upper leg, lower leg, and his foot. Upper leg, lower leg, and his foot. And then his right hand is holding a hat, so upper arm, lower arm, and hand. You can already see you get a very basic pose, and all I've done is paid attention to the core structure. And that's for Blue Boy. Now here's another famous painting. This is by Edgar Degas. He was a French artist and he loved to do ballet dancers. In fact, he loved the human body and how it moves so much. He did many paintings of ballet dancers because he loved to watch the body in motion. And so here is a very simple ballet dancer, and he did a lot of sketching. So what if I were to use this as a guide and all I wanted to do is the basic structure? And she has a dress on, so I can't even see everything. But let's just do it this way. Her head is down, facing down. Because her upper torso is bent towards me, I'm not going to see her neck, and her torso will look shorter because she's bent over. This would be her shoulder line. Her arms are up, so it's the upper arm and lower arm, and her hand is kind of tucked under. And I see her, this is her shoulder, and then there's her upper arm. The elbow connects the lower arm, and her hand's kind of tucked under. Her hips are back, and I see this one leg is bent, upper, lower, and foot. And this is more straight, upper, lower, and foot. So this is a great exercise you can do, friends. Take any figure that you see, maybe even an athlete in a magazine, and ask Mom and Dad if it's okay if you draw over with a Sharpie marker and try to get the basic structure, like a stick person. And that will really help you understand what you need to get a great figure drawing. Now, how are we going to use this figure drawing? Well, I want to have some fun and play around with it and just pretend that it's just a figure, and we're going to have it do some different things. So if I describe a scenario to you, I want you to try and draw it, making sure you're using all of the elements. The core spine, a shoulder line, a smaller hip line, and all of the parts of the arms and the legs. So let's do a figure that's smelling a flower. So a flower would be down on the ground, so he'd have to be looking down, so the oval will be tipped down. So you draw along. The spine is bent because he's bending over. Shoulder line. Arms may be leaning down on the legs. Hip line. And here's our bent legs coming out from the hip line. And then you can always put in the flower. How about we do a figure running? You know, when you're running and you're in motion, you're leaning forward. So our spine line would be leaning forward. Let's have our figure running that way. The head is leaning forward. Your arms are in motion. They don't just stay at your sides when you're running. So for our shoulder line, it's across the spine, and the arms are forward, and this arm is going back, right? When you run, one arm is forward and one arm is back. Our hip line, and of course, one leg would be forward, and the other leg would be back. So here's our figure running. Can you see it? This one's smelling a flower, this one's running. Let's do this figure kneeling to pray. So it's going to be lower because the kneeling, so the head's not going to be as high as our running friend. And I think when this figure is kneeling to pray, since we know he's kneeling, let's get the legs first. So the bottom one is against the floor, the upper leg is bent. So there's our hip line. The legs are bent, the feet are back, our spine, the head slightly bowed. And in order to get the arms just right, make your shoulder line, upper arm bent tightly at the elbow, and the hands together. This upper arm bent at the elbow, but then the hands together. And so here we have a figure kneeling to pray. You could do so many more poses, friends, if you understand the basic elements of the stick figure. I love this one of the figure kneeling to pray. Is that how you pray? Or do you just close your eyes wherever you are? Sometimes I get down on my knees and pray. You know, Daniel in the Bible got down on his knees to pray. Let me read you that passage in Scripture. This is Daniel 6:10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God. That's a nice picture, isn't it? He went to a special place to have time alone with God. I hope you do that too. But the important thing, friends, is not what position your body is in when you pray, although we should always be respectful when we're talking to God. It's just that you actually spend time praying. That's more important to God. It could be while you're in the car on your way to school or to an event. It could be in a circle with friends. Certainly right before you eat is a great time to pray and give thanks, but make sure you spend time praying. Next time we're going to be working on figures and the proportions of a figure. Remember we spent all that time doing the measurements and proportions for a portrait? Well, the same thing applies to figures because God designed us so beautifully. Well, that's going to take some time. But until we meet that time, I want you to spend time with your stick figures, putting them in all kinds of poses. See how much you can do, how creative you can be. I look forward to having you with me next time. See you then.